working with an interdisciplinary group of healthcare providers.
Okay.
My MD and NP colleagues often struggle with the issue of time constraints and all that they are expected to do during a clinical visit.
Okay.
So the question is, what ideas or strategies have you found helpful related to time and agenda setting as providers endeavor to partner with patients in a busy clinical setting?
Well, that's an easy one. Just kidding. Well, I'll tell you the first thing, and it's not even from a flippant perspective. It's from what I genuinely believe is the way you get better at it is to become proficient at MI. I mean, the tighter the time constraints, if you really are trying to affect long-term behavior change, for me, it really is, you need to become more proficient. The more skilled, the more fluent you are, the more you're measurably proficient at motivational interviewing, the more efficient conversations can go. And I think the challenge with that in hospital settings or clinical settings for doctors and nurses is there are just massive time constraints and so many things that have to get done. But what I think, and this, it's probably overused and over talked about, but what I really believe is part of efficiency is doing it right the first time. And rushing through and people not feeling heard and understood. When I think of efficiency and time constraints as well too, I think the majority of patients don't prefer to sit in waiting rooms or doctor's offices either. So I think you've got a healthcare provider and a patient who would really like an efficient process. And so my bias is I put more of the onus on the professional to know how to orchestrate that effectively. It's not the patient's job to orchestrate that effectively. It really is the provider's job to orchestrate that efficiently. So I think the low-hanging fruit is, yes, we can learn really good agenda setting tools, which is fine, but are you trying to set up a long-term sustained behavior change? Or is it something that's just a medical intervention that doesn't need a long-term sustained behavior change? If I have a headache and it's just one time and they prescribe something and I never come back again, that's not an MI-based conversation. So that can be fairly efficient. And I think healthcare providers are better at the assessment intervention, provide that and move forward. So I think those are less, take up less time. And I don't think that's what whoever submitted the question is asking as much about. It's if you're thinking from a motivational perspective, how can we be more efficient in that process? And so there are agenda setting tools. And those are, you can find anywhere on the internet. There's a lot of great agenda setting tools. The one I lean towards, because I love it because it's more MI based, is when you draw just a couple of circles on the page and just say, and I tend to draw the smaller circles with my agenda, and I'll just write a couple of things in those smaller circles, saying, here's some things I want to cover, and then have some big circles and say, but what do you want to make sure we cover today? So if you're thinking just a generic agenda setting tool, that's a fairly generic one that I think leans significantly more MI adherent, or towards a more MI approach, when it is, yes, we need to cover these things, but your agenda is more important, and we can cover these things. And you can throw in time frames. So you can say, with the 15 minutes that we have, here's a couple things I wanted to address, but I'm mostly curious what you want to make sure we get done in this 15 minutes. So that is completely MI adherent. That's just a very smart way of guiding a conversation, and being person-centered at the same time. So those are just out of the gate. Those are a couple of the things just off the top of my head. I think one of the things I lean towards so heavily is just becoming skilled at motivational interviewing. I think people do the one-day training or the lunch and learn and think, oh, I know how to do reflective listening, or, oh, I already know how to do open-ended questions, but that doesn't help me in my practice. But reflections and questions does not equal motivational interviewing. That level and depth of engagement efficiently and effectively, So when someone feels genuinely heard and understood, and then to have the skill set to extract language that's pertinent to the conversation, those are key constructs that a lot of people miss at first blush when they're first thinking of motivational interviewing, I think, in a healthcare setting. They think the reflective listening, we got to get the patient, I need to do some reflection so they feel heard and understood. Oh my gosh, they're talking about all this irrelevant stuff. I don't want to hear about this anymore. Now I need to tell them what they need to do. Mm-hmm. So I think that tends to be the misuse of MI from a MD or a NP perspective, that they're thinking, okay, we have to have better bedside manner, we have to have better engagement, we need to make sure that we get better customer satisfaction ratings. So I need to listen a little bit more. Gosh, I don't have time to listen to all the stuff they're talking about. So now we got to get on topic, and that doesn't make it motivational interviewing. So I think those are the things for me that, from I think what she's asking, that I would address in terms of how can we do better in clinical settings when we've got a lot of agendas. My number one answer, my honest answer, is take the time to become skilled at motivational interviewing, and that is going to make you more effective in the brief time you have. And the more effective you understand the skill set, the more readily you know, is this the tool I should be taking out at this moment in time? So I just think that the more skilled you are, the better the more efficient and the more effective in brief interactions. So
when you talk about proficient in motivational interviewing, how can people become proficient in motivational interviewing?
It's one of the things that it's just an area of obsession I ended up with, and Sue Akmos is here on the call as well too. My very first coding training was with Sue, and where my obsession came with, and for people to understand proficiency, is as an evidence-based practice, you can measure and taste to see, is this motivational interviewing, or is it something else? The analogy I like to use when I think of proficiency is, most professionals know how to make a cookie, but it doesn't mean that they know how to make Mrs. Fields' cookie, and it doesn't taste the same. And the more skilled we are when we use an evidence-based practice, it means it's measurable and repeatable. So can we measure it, and can we repeat it and capture it multiple times and give people feedback on how close is this conversation to motivational interviewing? Mm-hmm. So those are the things that are fascinating for me. And there are so many, truly, I think, and Sue can jump in on this as well too. I think at last count, there was at least 16 different ways to measure some level of fidelity to motivational interviewing and give some level of feedback. Some are very quantitative, some are more qualitative, some are used more readily in certain settings, but there are multiple, well over 10, closer to 20 tools, I think, on ways to measure, am I doing it right? So there's ways to measure it with proficiency. So measuring it doesn't make you proficient, it's actually the coaching. So I can sit somebody down in front of a TV set and have them watch golf pros all day long. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that they're going to get better at golfing. They don't become more skilled. They may become more knowledgeable. They may have a lot of opinions. Mm-hmm. They may be able to see who does it better than someone else, but that doesn't mean it's going to improve their golf game. Yeah. So what it takes is, if they want to improve proficiency, if they want to be able to make, a specific recipe or be able to do a certain skill set, you want somebody that's skilled at that skill set to coach you in that process as well too. Mm-hmm. So, if you're making a cookie, and you're trying to make Mrs. Fields' cookie, and I work on the quality assurance team of Mrs. Fields, I can take a bite of the cookie and say, well, there's just a little bit too much salt in here. And if you're really trying to get towards Mrs. Fields' cookie, this is going to get you closer to that recipe, if that's really what you want to do. And also have them taste the cookie and then taste the Mrs. Fields' cookie and see, oh, can you feel the difference? Can you see the difference between the two? That's how you start to build proficiency in the process.
So really, proficiency is starting with like the coaching piece of it.
It's with measuring it and coaching is what I'd say. Again, I can give people tips all day long, but you need to be able to hear or see their work. I need to be able to see their tape. I need to be able to taste their cookie. I need to be able to see their golf swing. We can sit and have coffee and talk about golf, and I could be an expert on it. It doesn't make them more skilled. It's the same thing. It's application and feedback in that process. So it's being able to practice it and have someone watch you, listen, actually, and pick up those, again, the fidelity points from a coding tool, and then receive some feedback that lines up with where you want to develop your skills professionally.
Okay. So one more question in line with this question.
Okay.
So Pamela was asking about, expediting essentially the process, and your answer is just because someone new has hopped on and I want to make sure that they're up to speed. Your answer is essentially the more proficient you are in MI, the quicker you can navigate those conversations. So my question is, as you become more proficient in MI, do you try to give yourself some time constraints to try and have a conversation in 10 minutes? Or, typically my conversations have been 45 minutes. I'm going to try and take them down to 30 minutes, and I'm going to try and do 20 minutes. Or do you try to challenge yourself in that way? Or is it just let's, hope I get this done in 10 minutes type thing?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think there's two things that I think of, Tammy, with that concept. One is, as soon as it's about me trying to get it within a certain amount of time, I'm starting to drift away from motivational interviewing, because it's more about my needs over the client's needs or the patient's needs.
Okay.
The reality is we all work with it, especially as managed care, with all of the drivers, with all the policies, with all the procedures. Our time constraints are so tight. But what I think of is, what ties into this for me is there's the knowledge base and there's the skill base. So there's the knowledge side and there's the skill side of it. So when I think within those time constraints, we can know a lot about it, but when it's game time, can you perform or can you produce? And what most human beings are going to do is what's most comfortable. So even if it's not the most efficient thing to do, it could be the most comfortable thing to do. So I get, I just have an awareness that if I'm trying to make it quicker for the sake of making it quicker, if I have too much energy there, my hypothesis would be it's going to have an impact on the person-centered nature of the approach.
Okay.
What I've noticed with my own skill set is the more that I practice the skill set, the more efficient my sessions become.
Okay.
So I would parse it that way, that you can feel there's more of an efficiency. And the beauty in it, when I'm thinking of, you said Pamela's question, in the hospital setting, is what I keep thinking about that question is, I just can't, there are patients out there that would spend all day in a clinical session with a doctor if they could have all day with them. But I think most people get frustrated if they have to wait even 5 minutes or 10 minutes past their appointment time. They want to get in and they want to get out. Well, you have a healthcare provider that wants to get in, wants to get out. So then I think, at face value, what's the problem? You got two people that want it to be efficient. So, and what that comes down to for me is effective communication. So how does their brain get engaged? How can I impart, as a patient, everything I'm struggling with in a way that comes out? And how does the provider extract what they need and frame a dialogue so they can get the information they need as readily as possible, so that the patient feels heard and understood? Oh my gosh, they hear and understand me. And the practitioner then can offer up information that augments that, and the conversation can work hand in glove. To me, that's what a healthcare provider would want, and that's, I think, what the vast majority of patients would want, is that level of efficiency and effectiveness. So what does it come down to? How effectively do we communicate that information between two different brains, and then collaborate, co-create the next steps from here in a partnership where the expert brings their brain to the forefront with a high level of respect for what the patient is saying their struggle or their presenting problem is.
Okay, cool.
All right. Mona, I see you've joined.
Hi, Casey. I'll be going off at 3:30 because I have a student coming for a session, but I wanted to pop on for a couple minutes.
Perfect. Do you have any questions since you're online?
Ooh, I think one of my questions is in terms of with when trying to use a motivational interviewing approach with people on the autism spectrum.
Okay.
Just kind of what are some helpful pointers in terms of interfacing with them in terms of like language?
Well, what I'm finding about this first webinar so far, this kind of webcast, is you guys like asking really, really easy questions. So that's fun. So the the thing that I always think of, so here's my baseline with almost any question is there potential for ambivalence about the person and their target behavior? So I'm just going to start from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, from a communications perspective, is that individual feeling heard and understood? So now you put it on the autism spectrum and you look at the social cueing side of it. So as a practitioner, I may have the capacity to step inside someone else's worldview, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to feel heard and understood the same way. It's like, how do I access their thought process or their worldview? So there's the basics of MI, but then I think of the complexities in these really, just really complex individuals we work with. One of the things that was probably most profound for me it was when I was doing a presentation and was listening to someone in Australia, and we're talking motivational interviewing, and someone was talking about working with people on the spectrum. And what they were talking about is when you're looking at executive functioning, you have to look at that kind of where somebody's at on the developmental spectrum and how do you access their brain. The example they provided, which was so helpful for me, is somebody on the spectrum, you're not going to ask them, how are you doing? Like, it's just too nebulous of a question. It doesn't access their brain. They don't even know what to respond to, depending on where they're at on the spectrum. They said the more you can paint a picture with your words, the more the brain can engage. So the example he said is the difference between asking, how are you doing? He might ask an adolescent, how are you doing in the morning when you're getting ready for school, when you're interacting with your mom? Like, that provides so much more context around a concept that will generate some response, some more opinion around that. The thing that I think when there's anything with the brain, and this is again just my take, there's so much more written and I am by no means an expert on this, but the thing that I think of with executive functioning, where someone is at in that process, is their brain able to be engaged, and do they have ambivalence about whatever is being talked about? Because there's having a conversation with somebody that's on the spectrum. Is it a behavior change based conversation? And are we as professionals or personal people in their lives trying to manage their behavior, or are we trying to affect behavior change? And I think what a lot of people do is, how do I use motivation to control or manage someone's behavior? And my first response is, well, that's not motivational interviewing. So I think what makes it more complex with someone on the spectrum is, can we access their brain to find out, do they have ambivalence about a target behavior, or is there a behavior that they're wanting to change? So, and that's what I think the first responses we can get may lead us to believe that maybe they don't have ambivalence. But I think where I hold myself to, where I push myself professionally to keep advancing is, if I'm the professional, how do I find more effective ways of accessing their thought process to find out, do they feel any internal conflict at all about things that are unfolding? And I think where our writing reflex gets triggered is when we find out with some behaviors with people on the spectrum is they don't feel conflicted with some of their behaviors. And then we try to install some social reasons why they should feel conflicted with their behaviors. And as soon as that starts to happen, we are slipping further away from a motivational approach. So I don't know if that's helpful, or if you have other thoughts or response. I know you have to get off here in a couple minutes, but.
It is helpful and visual, so I was taking notes because it makes sense. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
The thing that I'll reinforce that I said a little bit earlier with it, and I think just the work I've been trying to pay attention to around executive functioning is you're trying to, I think of people, lost in the woods, and how do we get them to push past branches that they've never gotten pushed back beyond. How do we engage their executive function on that level? And it really does take a level of mindfulness and skill on a practitioner's perspective to truly leave their worldview, step into someone else's worldview, and then to the best of your ability, try to paint the picture the best you can for an individual and see how does their brain respond to that. And we can choose words selectively to enhance or highlight certain things that could be going on in their thought process, and then to manage our writing reflex so we can step back and see how that individual responds to it. And that's the best way I've found to try to get access to someone's brain who is not as in the mainstream conversational as we might like.
I was going to say too, Mona, if it's helpful, I was just editing a video yesterday at Casey Coaching coming up in March. And I had a conversation with someone who he's on the spectrum for I know I'm not going to use the right terminology, but I believe he's under Asperger's, not necessarily, that might be under autism. Okay, yeah. So anyways, so you might enjoy that, Casey Coaching.
Thank you, Tammy. I'll look forward to that.
Yeah.
Is there any follow-up question, Mona? I know you have to bow out here in just like 1 minute.
I don't have a follow-up question. Thank you, though.
All right. Sue, do you have a take on that? I mean, you have so much experience.
No, I mean, I was just nodding, totally agreeing with what you were saying, and meeting the person where they're at, checking our writing reflex, making sure that we're really paying attention to the cues. Are we really trying to get that perspective as best we can, and using all the other tools in the toolkit that you have for working with someone dealing with those issues. And that's tricky. Like they have 8 tasks for learning motivational interviewing. That's why I was giggling when Casey was saying easy question. And the hardest task is blending MI with your other toolkit and skills. And so it's so cool that you guys are asking those questions, because that means you're at that point where you're starting to play with that, and that's really commendable. And it is kind of trial and error, and sort of that thing about empathy is about checking in and seeing how it lands, and then shifting as we need to shift.
And Sue, when you talk about that, I think the thing that rounds it out for me even more is really acknowledging that it's never what MI was originally intended for. When Bill, started writing some thoughts down of why he was doing what he's doing and things that were working or and started hypothesizing, he was not thinking of people on the spectrum. Right. He was not thinking of, I was just training last week in Seattle with people working with the homeless population. He was not writing from a place of, well, let's take people with major mental illness that are homeless and involved in the legal system and have polysubstance abuse and are injecting, on a daily basis. That's not where his brain was thinking when he was writing down the initial concepts of MI. So these questions that come up and these ways that MI is expanding into so many different fields, I mean, I think as practitioners, as clinicians, I think everyone that's trying to apply MI in these offshoots are pioneers. I mean, there's not massive amounts of research around it. There's emerging research that we have around some of these areas, but it's people saying, okay, if we stick with the basic construct, does the individual have some ambivalence? Is there a target behavior that they have some feeling 2 ways about? I think MI might work in this perspective. Yeah. I think one of the most profound things that from me, over the arc of my experience with MI is I remember in the very, very beginning when I first was exposed to MI, I remember people explicitly saying, you do not think of using MI with suicidality. Like it's not indicated. Like there's other things out there. And now there's chapters in books on how you use MI with suicidality because we learn more. And so that's why I love Mona's question about, how does this fit on spectrum with spectrum disorders? And even the one in the clinical setting. I mean, it's obviously in behavioral health and very readily in healthcare with motivational interviewing. But the more we know, the better questions we ask, the more we study, the more we research, the more we can explore this and find this out, which is why this field of MI is never boring.
I know there's so much research out there. It's so fun to see. And I was thinking about even with Elizabeth Santa Anna's work, she does work with homeless, mental health, dually diagnosed folks in groups. So she took the MI in groups research, and then she set out a curriculum and program around how to do that with that population, and then trial and error. And, they've gotten really good results, but it's, that started out as in infancy. And same with, I loved what you said about the people that might be listening to this are experts in their own right. And
Yes.
with the spirit of MI are going to figure some things out. One of my colleagues here in Minnesota has a great story of using it with a young woman who is very developmentally delayed. And when she tells that story, it's just amazing because the tenets of helping that person figure out a way to think it through and figure out what matters to her, and using coloring and paper and pen, and let's put that on the fridge if you want. And it was just so powerful. And in fact, it was in a clinic because she was a dietitian. And the doctor, the next time the person came in, she had lost like 5 pounds. And the doctor said, "Oh my gosh, what did you do? How did you use MI?" And so again, that was trial and error. It's really impressive. Yeah.
Well, I think that's why, back to the original question, when you take what you're talking about, Sue, the original question of it, I just think the more efficient, the more proficient you get at it, the more your brain starts to see different ways you can use the tool. And so it is these, I think all these pioneering efforts of just, can I move the ball a little further, or can I expand into this field or this way of thinking? And I think that's really no different than how can we be more efficient in the time that we have when we have a busy schedule? It is a part of trial and error. And I'm going to go back to what I already said, but it comes down to the proficiency of the skill set. I think where I get the most nervous is when people said, well, I tried MI and it didn't work. And then if we can actually capture the conversation, it's like, well, that wasn't what I would say is phenomenal MI. And there's some good reflective listening, some good empathetic listening, but all the components of MI are not quite there. So is it MI didn't work, which I think there's times that MI doesn't work or it's not indicated, but then it's like, is MI actually being used to fidelity, which are two different questions. And I think those are the things that, especially when we're newer and we feel like, oh, I've already done this before, this already makes sense. Is that an accurate assessment? Which is why being able to measure it is such an amazing thing, and why MI gets so much attention, is we can measure and find out, it doesn't work in these situations, or, ooh, if we were a little more skilled at this, could it work?
Yeah. And if anyone listening, and I'm sure Casey has talked about this, but there's so much power in just recording your own conversation and listening to it back yourself for the different tenets of MI. And it's amazing how much you can learn already about what you're doing really well, because people always said I did better than I thought. And people pick up on, oops, that wasn't MI right there. And that's probably why I got the response I got. So even before you can get the gift of being coached by Casey or John, doing that for yourself is unbelievably helpful. Yeah.
Self-study, I'm all about that. That makes a difference. Yes.
It's a great way. And that's why I love the analogy so much. We perfect our cookie recipe because we taste it and it's like, you know what, I don't like that. All right, next time I'm going to put some butterscotch chips in there and not as many chocolate. I mean, you find out what works, and there's what works, and then when we know what lines up with motivational learning. And what I love, Sue, what you're talking about is, and Tammy, the self-study side of it, you can watch the greats on a video of how great they are, and then listen to yourself and just go, man, that was better than I thought. Ooh, that was rough. And that's how learning happens. from being able to do that. And where some of the frustration comes from too is that we fall in those same traps over and over, which is why coaching can be incredibly beneficial for some people some of the time.
Well, I love the self-study piece of it because I don't know why, but my brain always goes to, well, my tone of voice was really good in that, or, I was really doing good. And then you re-listen to it and you're like, oh, that wasn't, yeah. It's like, you don't believe it until you actually hear it, that you're like, oh yes, that definitely wasn't what I intended it to be.
Well, and what you just said, Tammy, I think is so perfect when I think of measuring MI. It's not what I intended it to be. So when you're asking earlier about, well, if I'm trying to get my 20-minute conversation down to 10-minute conversation, that's an intention. Well, the intention to speed up time doesn't necessarily make you better at motivational interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? But to listen more effectively and to respond to language more precisely, that can speed up time. So that's why the original question was a great question on, like, if I want to get better and shave time off my score, do I focus on that? It's like, focus on getting better at the skill set and measuring the skill set. And I can almost guarantee you'll shave time off because you're going to be more efficient, not because you're trying to shave off time, but because people are feeling more heard and understood, more focused on what the goal is and what their next steps might be, or what you can co-create and partner for what those next steps might be.
That makes so much sense. Literally, I'm replaying. I was a tennis player and I love playing tennis. Like, I would never start a game going, I'm going to finish this game in 30 minutes. Like, that just doesn't even make sense, because then you're, like you said, you're focused on the wrong thing. Yes. Where every point you're like, I'm going to do my best to maybe finish this point quickly or whatever. But again, even if you get too focused on that, all of a sudden you're messing up like crazy because you're focused on the wrong thing. So that makes a lot of sense.
Even if you only have the court for 30 minutes, right? Yeah. You just know the reality in medical.
That's it.
Exactly.
But you're right, it's just a different mindset. Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And what I like about that is because then it does help. I think it is difficult in the current environment to stay focused on what are we here for. Mm-hmm. And when almost every indicator and every pressure is we need to be better and faster and cheaper, if that's all the message is, then our professional brain is, how do we do this faster and cheaper? Like, every time I sit down, it's like, how do I be effective and efficient and save money and make sure we're doing what we need to do? If that's what you're going to think about, that's what you're going to focus on. And then we get frustrated the outcomes are not changing, and sometimes they're going the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. And then we get more pressure and more stress and go, okay, faster, listen more. And that's where that stress comes in. So I really have such an appreciation for where the question comes from. And it's why I feel really comfortable sitting back up onto, we know from an evidence-based practice, any evidence-based practice, if you're doing it with fidelity, there's going to be improvements in outcomes. Mm-hmm. If you're doing it with, and the better you get at the fidelity side of it, the more skilled you are, we know those outcomes tend to come quicker. Yeah. So that it's just, it's the nature of what we know with evidence-based practice.
Well, and it's the nature too of any skill set that you're trying to become good at, like any pro, player for whatever sport or whatever, the more they become efficient and effective at and an expert in their field,
yes,
the faster they get to their ultimate goal.
Yes.
So yeah, makes a lot of sense.
And what I think of is, it's so interesting. I keep going back to that perspective, the clinical setting and time. I just keep thinking, when you talk to healthcare professionals, what they say is, if the patient would just listen. And you talk to the patients, they're saying, if the doctor would just listen. And it's just like, oh, that's so, you can just see that the dog chasing its tail with that. It's like, oh my gosh. And so what does it come down to? It's not just listening. It's just strategically, how do we access somebody's brain, find out what the issue is, kind of merge it with our expertise or our skill set, and then co-create a path towards solution or resolution where the patient feels like, this is exactly what I needed. Okay, I know what my next steps are. It just is such a win-win perspective, but most people, they want to learn this over lunch. They want to learn this in a half-day seminar. And and I think in the healthcare profession, when you've got incredibly brilliant people, they know how fast their brains work, and their brain goes, I've got it. But that does not mean they have the skill set. So they have the knowledge, but they don't have the application and the skill set necessarily that's commensurate with the knowledge base that they're developing.
I think that's always a really good point, because everyone can relate to, oh, well, I understand it, but just because you understand it doesn't mean, just because I understand the game of basketball doesn't mean I know how to play basketball at all.
Exactly. That's a perfect. And now I just keep, it's perfect. And, you don't hire a coach for one season. You're going to give them at least 2 or 3 years or 4 years to actually take their thought process and work with the real human beings that they're working with to pull it all together. And that's the difference between having the basic knowledge base, and then every human being that comes into your office is a different human being. So the structure is the same, but how you pull the best out of them, that's a mastery to that. But it's based on some very specific principles as well too.
And we can really normalize that, because there's, and you've probably talked about this too, Casey, but it's called deceptive simplicity, meaning it feels really good and intuitive and so connected. And that's why we all got into health and human services in the first place. So that's another reason why we think we're already doing it, maybe more than we are, because we really resonate with it. But that's also validating, because then when you listen to that tape and you go, ooh, you're normal. It's normal, right? Just like the analogies you were just making, Tammy. Yeah.
And I think what we find too is, especially with the deceptive simplicity part of it, is what I found in my experience is the more training is tailored to the group that's being trained, the more the participants realize it's more complex than they originally thought it was.
Yes.
If they get exposed to the same material over and over again, then it reinforces the deceptive simplicity of it.
Yes.
But when the material is really tailored to the questions and the thought process of the individuals, all of a sudden it opens up new landscapes and new frontiers. So like, I had not even thought about it from this perspective. Like, wow, I need to think about this more. Like this is starting to affect my practice. Like, why didn't I learn this years ago? And that's when you can see it crosses from that knowledge to a more accurate assessment of the difference between the knowledge base and the skill set aspect of it.
Yeah.
When they're exposed to the more complex the material is, the more they realize it's a complex skill set. But if the material is kind of a rote material over and over and over again, then it becomes like, well, I already know this, I already know this, I already know this.
And unfortunately, that's how a lot of people get their start to MI, is with just a few tools, and then that sort of feeds into that. So it's one of the reasons a lot of us don't like to do like a lunch and learn on MI or a half day on MI or something, because it can feed into that a little bit. It can still be a good start if it's done the way Casey talked about, but yeah.
Those are the traps, and everybody wants it quick and easy.
Of course.
So whether it's a 15-minute, clinical sessions with a nurse practitioner, or whether it's a 1 hour with a bunch of professionals who are saying, we need to be skilled in MI by the end of this 1 hour, because that's what our grant said. Either way, that's a tall order for pressures around all the expectations. So great.
Any other questions?
Yeah. So this is a good launch to our first.
Yeah.
Anything else? Did any other questions come in, Tammy, or are we good to go?
Let me check one more time. No more questions have come in.
No more questions came in. All right. Perfect. This was good. Well, we knew we'd blocked an hour for it. We're just going to let it last however it lasted. It was about 45 minutes, which was good. Any last thoughts from you, Sue?
No, I was just going to give you kudos, and the people that are on the call or listen to it later, just the fact that in line with everything you guys have been talking about, that this is what you're doing, is you're investing in it and asking good questions and thinking about it and taking 45 minutes out of your day to do so, which is fantastic. Even if you could only take 10 of those 45, you know. So it's kind of how it works. We call it learning to learn. And that's what we've learned about how people learn MI. That's how it's kind of done. So kudos. I think this is cool that you're doing this, Casey. And
Good. Thank you.
yeah,
Tammy, anything else?
No, we just hope everyone can join in and ask their own questions, because that's the perfect piece of this is, you know, as everyone's trying to implement this in their own world, whether it's professionally, personally, whatever, questions are going to come up to where it's like, what do I do in that situation? Or, you know, how does MI relate to this, or those type of things. And again, that's why we wanted to create an opportunity once a month for people to check in with Casey and get his thoughts. And again, ask a variety of questions from MI related to communication related to scenario related, and go from there. So.
Well, and what I want to cap that off with, Tammy, when you bring that up and tie into what Sue said, is there is just so much information out there. I am by no means an expert in all things MI. It's my obsession with reading and studying. So I am not the end all be all. And so when you do have those 15 minutes, it's type into a Google search and find out other research that's going on. And there's just so many brilliant people in this field. You know, and so I'll keep asking questions from my worldview, and I'm going to keep saying, just because it's my worldview doesn't make it 100% accurate across all things MI either. So this is just my take from my perspective, and I just want to reinforce that as well too, because there's so much great data. There's so much that has been written on this, that people have studied autism and motivation infinitely more than I have. But it's my way of trying to synthesize it and provide some of that information in a way that's helpful. So.
Perfect.
All right.
Thanks for joining.
Let me chime in. And you guys, I didn't expect that, but that was
Yeah, absolutely. That's the point of the webcast. We're going to try to encourage more and more people to be willing to kind of hop on the video side of it, and we want it to be as interactive as possible. You know,
I bet they will once they watch. Yeah. Join up, guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then,
all right. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
thank you.